Hello and welcome to the After Sermon podcast, where we pick up all the bits from the cutting room floor that didn't make it into our sermons and break them down. And today we're looking at the sermon, Buy High, Sell Low. Hi, my name is Christopher.
And my name is James.
And this is the After Sermon podcast, as you may know from the intro. Today's sermon we're looking at is Buy High and Sell Low. And I've brought in a special guest for such a special podcast.
Yeah.
James is quite the business, aficionado? Is that the right word?
Yeah.
You got some award for business in school, right?
Yeah, back in, year 10 or something.
Yeah.
Some
Commerce
merit
award. It's a pretty good award.
Yeah.
Probably start a big business one day. Alright, if you're starting a business, James, in the future, what's it gonna be? What are you selling? What's your product?
Oh, my product. I used to be really into philosophy, more modern philosophy, how to live the best life, and kind of taking God's word and putting it in a way that people more understand. So a lot of people, they struggle to read the Bible and they don't take in the effort that's necessary to actually grasp the wisdom that's in it. I plan to make a kind of a philosophy rock band of people, basically going around making YouTube videos, giving sermons, if you will. Just making the Bible a bit more translatable and teaching what the Bible has to offer.
Awesome. So it sounds like you're almost kind of getting wisdom from the Bible and wisdom from some of the best minds throughout history and kind of getting the best of both worlds by the sounds of it.
Merging philosophers and the teachings of the Bible together and creating useful wisdom for those who don't necessarily look for it when they need it.
Awesome. Alright, well, that's definitely something these guys should keep an eye out for, but let's get into the recap. And just before we do, if you haven't watched the sermon Buy High, Sell Low, go to the link below and come back here later because this podcast is full of spoilers. With that out of the way, let's get into our quick recap. So essentially, we begin with the story of Ronald Wayne, a guy who worked for Apple Incorporated, sold his 10% stake before the business really took off, and if he'd kept that, it'd be worth $60 billion as of April 2016. So we looked at the idea of making bad trades, and that in business, you want to be able to make a profit. So you buy a product at a lower price, and then you sell it for a higher price to the consumer. And so then we came up with this idea of bad trades, and we looked at a bad trade in the Bible, Jacob and Esau. Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of stew. But then we evaluated ourselves and said, are we at risk of making that same mistake at times? We've all been given an inheritance by God, and do we sometimes find ourselves trading that inheritance of salvation for, the things of this world? We want to make a swap. Since we can't have them both in the spur of the moment just to satisfy our immediate desires, we can sometimes find ourselves making a bad trade ourselves. And we also looked at the impact that our decisions can have on other people. So that's pretty much a quick recap. Alright, let's get into our impressions. James, what did you think of the sermon? Did you like it?
Yeah, unlike a lot of your sermons, Chris, it wasn't one that blew my mind per se. The information that you presented, it was quite common knowledge. Don't impulse buy, always look from hindsight, always keep a logical perspective, don't fall into the trap of instant gratification. It's something that we've all heard before, but it's something that definitely also needs to be reinforced.
Yeah.
Because although a lot of people, don't give into instant gratification, the very power of instant gratification is given to instant gratification. It's, so it's very important that this idea is reinforced so that people really get to understand it. And I think a story like the one that you presented with the whole ridiculous soup trade, it's a really good example, and it really sticks in your mind just because of how absurd it is. So I really liked it. I thought it was really a good reinforcement of the general idea.
Awesome. Well, good to hear that it's some good information to hear every now and then, and I'm glad that you thought that, because yeah, it really is something that we should be aware of, even if not in our spiritual lives, just in our regular day-to-day lives. Don't be an impulse buyer.
Yeah.
Don't make those trades.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, let's get the ball rolling by going to our segment, the drawing board. James, what is the drawing board?
The drawing board is where we discuss the sources, inspirations, and goals of the sermon in order to better understand the sermon in question.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So pretty much, I was reading through Patriarchs and Prophets, who, for those who don't know, is sort of written in a style of a biblical commentary. And so often what I'll do is I'll read a chapter of that book and then read the chapter in the Bible that it's relevant to, that it's commentating on, just so I can get a better understanding or a better appreciation for the text. So I was reading through the chapter titled Jacob and Esau, and it's explained pretty much how Christians can surrender their inheritance that they've been given for things just as low of value as, just stew or pottage, however you want to say it, for just trivial and futile things, really. And it blew me away how simple it was and yet profound. And it really became something then that I wanted to get across. And for most of the people, in your church, they're all good people, they've all made that commitment. I don't think any of them really have a specific vice or sin that is preventing them from salvation or anything. But even as you said, it still gives us a greater understanding of our salvation, the significance of our inheritance, and also just reinforces that idea that we have, and can also help us think in those times where we're tempted to make that immediate gratification to not do so. And so from that basic concept, I came up with the rest, the Apple story, the business concept, and I did a lot of research into the nation of Edom, which is the nation that came after Esau's descendants. I really went on like a big, almost an archaeological, historical thing. I had so many sources. Yeah. I had 30 pages of this stuff, and I'm like, I'm not going to fit this in the sermon. Luckily, we're going to cover not all of it, thankfully, not all 30 pages. I just picked out some of the highlights, and we'll go over those more in the cutting room floor when we get there. One of the interesting things that I'm sure no one picked up on was that the very beginning of the story, about 50% of it is actually made up of quotes from Ronald Wayne himself. Some of it is me putting it in and describing it as a story, but a lot of the stuff explaining why he wanted to quit the business, that's actually just word-for-word quotes from him in interviews nearly 50 years after that fact. Also, little, I suppose you would call it Easter egg, if you've watched the sermon and you saw the slides, if you pay close attention, the little Monopoly piece that I have, the little car, it actually moves around from slide to slide. So you can tell by the time it gets to the very end property on the board, that means we're at the end of the sermon. So it was kind of indicating how far along we're in the sermon by how far along the piece was going.
Wow, I didn't even notice that. I was absent-minded, but...
So yeah, that was a little Easter egg, but that's pretty much it for the drawing board. Alright, let's get into our main meat of the podcast, the cutting room floor. James, what is the cutting room floor?
The cutting room floor is the segment where we basically discuss the parts of the sermon that didn't make it into the final product, and kind of just talk them over.
Cool. Alright, so there was a lot of stuff. To begin with, we're going to go rapid fire here. We're not going to look up these verses, because this is a lot of verses. So get ready for these. Isaiah 11:14, as well as 21:11 through 12. Jeremiah 25:21, as well as 49:7 through 22. Ezekiel 25:12 through 14 and verse 35. Amos 1:11 and 12, and Malachi 1:2 through 5. Yes. Wow. Those are just some of the prophecies regarding Edom. And in fact, the nation of Edom is mentioned 99 times in the Bible. So we hardly scratch the surface there. But if you want to learn more about Edom and what happened to Esau's descendants after the whole stew incident, there's a lot of stuff there in the Bible. Also, you can look up Deuteronomy 30 verses 19 and Matthew 6:19 through to 21. They're not in reference to Edom, but if you go look them up, you'll realize the relevance that they have to the topic that we talked about. James, tell me, I'm putting you in the hot seat here.
Oh, okay, I'm ready.
But did you see any similarities with this story and any other stories in the Bible about someone willing to give up their inheritance for, things of the world?
I have heard stories. I'm not a big Bible guy.
In training.
Yeah, in training. But it does remind me of kind of the prodigal son in a way.
Oh, give the man a prize. He
okay. Like if you compare what we want with basically what we need, there's a huge difference, and there's a very fine line with that as well. A lot of people want money because it's a desire and it kind of gives you pleasure, but people often have a really hard time kind of deciphering between pleasure and happiness, and what will give me the most pleasure and instant gratification compared to what will give me the most happiness in the long term and make me the most content with my life. And a lot of what I'm talking about is just around money versus relationships, or life experiences and fulfillment versus having, awesome cars and a big house.
Yeah.
If you asked around, I'm sure a lot of people would rather travel the world in a van if they could, which is quite cheap, quite easy to do, than have like a massive mansion and live in the same city your whole life. Because we do have that kind of wisdom about ourselves, but we don't often pursue it because the world is often like it keeps bombarding us with, you need money to be happy, and just chase an inheritance. In fact, a lot of families have actually broken up their relationships, just chasing after the inheritance from their deceased parents or grandparents. And it's really sad to see too, because they totally miss the point. I mean, instead of grieving over, hey, we lost a family member, guys, everyone's having a big feud over who can get the most money, who can get the most instant gratification. We're so deluded in that aspect. It's quite absurd, and it actually makes the whole super ordeal look pretty alright.
Yeah.
I mean, throwing away family relationships for such a thing as money, it's really, you can't afford to lose sight of what's important in that aspect.
Yeah. I think the big takeaway from that is it's impossible to have it all. You have to sacrifice something. So if you want to chase after money, as you said, you might have to sacrifice a relationship, or in order to get whatever it is in life, you always have to sort of sacrifice something. There has to be some sort of compromise. And so with the prodigal son, it was a relationship with his father in order to get his inheritance and go where he wanted. And the reason I didn't talk about the prodigal son at all, you kind of make the same point. Don't give up your salvation for useless stuff. It's the same sort of deal, but the deal in the prodigal son sort of seems kind of good at the time, if you know what I mean. He gets all this money and he goes and he has fun. Obviously, in hindsight, we know it's a bad decision, but to the son, it looks like a pretty good deal. At least it's not wise, but it looks good. Esau's deal is just bad.
Yeah.
There's no good way to look at it, so that's why I preferred that, and chose to specify that just to really hammer home how bad a deal it is to swap your inheritance for something of lesser value.
Yeah, and it can be so confusing as well. Like, it can be so unapparent, because like you said, you didn't choose a prodigal son because it was really apparent that, hey, this is maybe not so much of a bad deal. But in the case of what you talked about this sermon, it was very obviously a really, really bad deal.
Yeah.
But it oftentimes in life, it's not that obvious. And so it is important that we're always aware of what sacrifices we have to make. And I really like how you mentioned sacrifices too, because it really comes down to, what deal do you want to make? Do you want to make this good trade, or do you want to make this potentially really bad trade, that looks really good, but isn't going to work out in the long run? What will it give you in hindsight? Would you rather spend $200 on a rug that will give you instant gratification and pleasure for the 2 days that you experience the rug and that before you become accustomed to it? Or would you rather spend the $200 on, 20 cups of coffees with friends and just experience all of that life that's there?
It all comes down to what where your
Yeah,
priorities and values are, really.
Yeah, it's all about making the right trades.
Yeah.
Sacrificing what's bad for what's good instead of what's good for what's bad.
Awesome. Well, we're going to enter a very special round. And when I say special, we got like 3 special rounds in the cutting room floor today, so none of them are really special. But our first one is the Hebrews round. And that's because we're going to be looking a little bit at the book of Hebrews. Just as I was finalizing this sermon, I'd finished reading the book of Hebrews and realized that it pretty much fit into my sermon really well. But to put it in would be a huge tangent for me to go on, just a huge sidetrack that really would bring away from the message of it. So I decided to keep it in here. Just a bit of context, the entire book of Hebrews is one big letter, pretty much, talking about how Jesus is better than and superior in every way. He's a better sacrifice because he dies once for all instead of lambs having to be brought pretty much every day. He's a better high priest because he doesn't have to make sacrifices for himself and because he's sinless. And so pretty much it explains that everything on earth is described as a shadow of the heavenly. And if you want to join with us, we're going to begin by reading in Hebrews 9:22. And James, do you want to read that out for us?
And according to the law, almost all things are purified with blood, and without shedding of blood there is no remission.
Okay, so without the remission of blood, or without the shedding of blood, whatever translation you have, there cannot be any atonement for sins. The wages of sin is death. The punishment for sin is death, and so without the shedding of blood, there cannot be any atonement. But we read something interesting when we get to when we go to chapter 10, and we read verses 1 and 4. And I'll read that out for you guys. For the law, having a shadow of the good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with these same sacrifices which they offer, continually year by year, make those who approach perfect. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats could take away sins. So, here's a question for you, Mr. Sullivan. Again, hot seat time.
Mm-hmm.
We just read that without the shedding of blood, there can't be any forgiveness of sins. But just before, we read that the blood of lambs is not sufficient in taking away sin. So, in that case, if the blood of the lamb can't do anything, why is it that in the Old Testament, God commanded these people to, sacrifice a lamb, and that was supposed to atone for their sins, if we just read that the blood of the lamb did nothing?
I don't know. Explain.
That's it. And that's what kind of... I had sort of the same reaction. I had an idea in my head, and then the book of Hebrews goes and tells us pretty clearly, but I was thrown off by it as well. Because
it just kind of makes no sense to me. I mean, I can't think why, why there would be such a contradiction.
Oh, a contradiction?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's read in verse 11. Actually, verse 11 pretty much just reiterates the fact that these sacrifices can't take away the sins that we're trying to get rid of. But it's not till we get to chapter 11 and verse 1 that we begin to understand what this apparent contradiction really is. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1.
Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony.
Cool. So, James, I think we've discussed this definition of faith even before. Before this, and we've always... Well, I found it difficult to explain to people who aren't Christian what it means. Because whenever someone asks, what does faith mean, they always take you here. But I have to say that unless you read the entire book of Hebrews in and of itself, that makes no sense, really. It doesn't give the proper understanding. When I just went and read through Hebrews really deeply start to finish, and I came across this, and then what follows next, I went, so that's what it means. Because whenever people hear this and are skeptical, they always assume that this faith is blind, because it's evidence of things not seen. Therefore, your beliefs cannot be founded on anything.
Yeah.
But what the entire book of Hebrews is saying is faith is hoping for something in the future that you have not yet seen. You believe it is in the future, you have faith in it, despite the fact that you've never seen it. So this is what the sacrifices meant. Every time the people went and sacrificed a lamb in the Old Testament, they had faith that what they were doing was atoning for their sins. Not only that, but they all knew about the Messiah, the promised one to come, who would come and make the world new and do all these things.
So you're saying that although the blood of the lamb actually doesn't do much, they're merely saved through the faith that it did?
Exactly. The blood of the lamb does nothing. It's the action that they do, the action of showing trust, and the action of them sacrificing the lamb is just showing that they have faith in the Lamb of God to come, that hasn't come yet. They haven't seen him, they don't know about him, but God's instructed them to do this. And he says, do this in faith, never having yet seen the Lamb of God, Jesus Christ, who is going through that once and for all for everything. So really what we're talking about then is the blood of Jesus. The blood of Jesus is the only thing that can create the forgiveness of sins, not the blood of lambs or people or whatever. It's only Jesus.
Yeah, and I guess that makes sense too. I mean, because obviously, you take some blood and there it is. You're not really connecting it with the spiritual world until you're having faith in any aspect. So faith really is the engine for the connection through to God and anything between the physical and spiritual world.
Yeah, exactly. The actions testify to their faith. And if you're ever asked, how were people saved in the Old Testament before Jesus ever died on the cross, that's your answer. They put their trust in the cross before they'd even seen it. Through their actions, they showed that they have faith in something not yet seen. And that's why that definition makes more sense when it's in the context of the rest of the book. And then the author gives a list of examples of people who had faith all throughout the Old Testament in chapter 11. And the very first example he gives is Abel, whose story is literally just about sacrificing a lamb before he gets killed by his brother. So to me, that was really the author, hitting that home. Think of Noah and the flood. Noah, for 100 years, could never see the flood. But he built the ark in faith, knowing that it was going to come. Abraham and Sarah, they were told they were going to have children. They couldn't see that happening for a long time, and then they had children, but they had faith in that time where they were uncertain.
Do you think that if they didn't have faith, they wouldn't have children?
That's a really interesting question. I would probably say yes, because they prayed to God for a child. They specifically prayed to God for a child, and in James, ironically, in the book of James, it says, when you pray, don't be like a double-minded man who, who's tossed by the waves. I'm paraphrasing here, it's like the Message. But essentially what it's saying is if you're having doubts while you're saying it and you don't have faith, then God's not going to respond to your prayer. There's no point in asking for something like, hey, could you get me this, but I know you're not, so don't worry about it.
Yeah. Who's
going to do that? Like, even if you did that to people, like, hey, could you pass the salt, but not really, because I know you're not, so just, you know what, just leave the salt, but I really want it, but just leave it there. Like, how would you interpret that if someone did that to you?
Yeah. Like I said, faith is the engine, so I suppose for the prayer to be realised, it would have had to be from a place of faith in the first place.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Awesome. So then we go into Hebrews chapter 12, and we begin in verses 14 through to 17, and they talk about the heavenly hope. Abraham talks about Abraham. He never really got to see the promised land that he was given, but the author says that he had a hope in the kingdom to come. He had a hope that when he died and Jesus would come back at the second coming, that he would be brought up to heaven. He had a heavenly hope in a better promised land. And I suppose that's the faith that we can have now. We've never obviously have never seen heaven. We haven't seen the second coming, yet we know it's in the future, and we have faith in it despite having never seen it. And I suppose that's almost our equivalent today. And the Hebrews 12, 1 and 2, the author describes the Christian life as a race. You can't see the finishing line, but you have faith that the finishing line is there. And not only that, but that there's a reward when you finish this marathon, that there's something there. And so you keep your eyes on Jesus, you have faith in Him, and you run towards the finishing line. And then in the following chapter, I can't find the reference for it, so sue me. But it then talks about Esau in this exact same book. And to me, that was just a mind blow, because it goes, wow, so that's really what Esau was doing, the exact same thing. His inheritance was in the future, but he didn't have faith.
Yeah.
Not like the people who were sacrificing the lambs, not like Noah or Abraham. They couldn't see it yet. Esau could not see his inheritance yet, and it was in the future, and that's why he was so ready to abandon it. That's why he was so ready to give it away and so dismissive. It meant nothing to him, he didn't care about it, and it seemed too far off in the future for it to hold any relevance to him.
Do you think faith is just being able to, to see it, or more having the will to pursue it? Because I know that they kind of go hand in hand, but with Esau, it was kind of like he knew it was there. Or this was my interpretation of the story anyway. He knew it was there, but he didn't go for it because he was ignorant. Do you think faith had something to do with his ignorance? Do you think he very well could have been faithful, but just stupid? Because he did try and get it back afterwards, as you were saying to me before.
Yeah, I think. I found the verse I was referring to. Let's read that, and then maybe we can get a better understanding.
Sure.
It says in Hebrews 12, and we'll begin in 15, looking carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. For he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. So
there you go. Perhaps he did have faith, but was just really in the moment and not thinking straight.
He was really in the moment and not thinking straight. And not only that, he missed his opportunity. By the time it was there, it was done. It says, afterwards, he wanted to get it. Later again, he was rejected. And even in the main text in 25, it says he despised his birthright. He didn't want it anymore. He hated it. He hated everything about it. And then when he wanted to go get it again, when Isaac was giving the blessing, he tried to, rejected again.
It's so important to getting your timing right, because you never know when your time is up, really. And it's really important to make that good trade, perhaps, sacrifice, going and work on Saturday, or making some money, or Sunday, or whatever day you go to church. On your Sabbath day, maybe you could have gone to a party or something, but you choose to keep it holy and rest and pray and go to church. And it's those sacrifices, those trades that we have to make, and that are all to do with the timing of it. See, Esau, he made a very poorly timed trade, and a very bad one at that. And by the time he wanted it back, it was too late. It's important to make the good trade while you still can.
Yeah, that's the thing. The Bible always talks about the fact that there's a time when that choice is no longer going to be available. It's going to be a time when it is too late, and you don't want to be on that on that boat when it sails. Yeah,
absolutely. Like, imagine you had $10,000 and you had to buy a car, and every day you lost $100, and then eventually, like, your car, the quality of your car is getting worse and worse, right? And eventually you're just not going to have enough money to buy a car, and then you die. Let's say a car keeps you alive or something. It's the same thing with Christianity and with Christ. You have depleting amount of time, and time is really that really valuable resource. It's ever depleting. You can't get it back. You can't trade for it, and it's going away while as we speak. And soon enough, you're not going to have enough time to make that trade.
I think you just made me really depressed. I can never trade it. It's depleting, and it's going to be one day gone.
You have to use it wisely.
That was a slap of reality.
And also, on top of that, you never know when your time's going to be up.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as you know, you can have $200 or $1 million. Either way, you could die tomorrow. You could die in 80 years' time. You have no idea. And so, why risk it? You know?
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. And just to finish off our little Hebrews bonus round, hot seat time again. Maybe the amount of times I put you in hot seat, it should be its own segment for this one.
Yeah, fine. For an uneducated Bible guy.
Oh well, trials bring forth perseverance and good character. So, Hebrews 12:14. I'll read it out for you, and then I have a question. This is just a bonus thing I found interesting. I might even be wrong on this. This is just what I thought. But it says, "Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord." And you know what? It's the incorrect reference. That's not the verse I was after written down. So you passed the hot seat anyways.
Oh,
no,
excellent.
the verse I'm looking for, and someone can fill me in, but it talks about being perfected and sanctified by Jesus. Now, sanctification is the process of getting closer to perfection. It's becoming holy. Why is it then that the author says you are perfected and then sanctified? Shouldn't perfected be after sanctified?
Ooh. It's one of those things that kind of seems illogical, but it really brings it out an underlying message. Perhaps sanctified means holy and pure and without sin. And while you are perfect, while you are made in the image of God, I could be very wrong. This is my interpretation of it.
I'll give you what I think afterwards, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah, while we are made perfect, while we are made in the image of God, while we are extremely loved by our Father, we're at the same time broken. We're kind of like a really shiny vase and that was smashed through sin. And one day it will be restored. We can try and put the pieces back together, but we can't really be truly sanctified until we get rid of
the sinful nature. Yeah. I'm going to build up on what you said and use that same analogy. We've been smashed. We're still smashed. Pardon me. We've been smashed, and we're still smashed now. But here's the thing. I think because it's talking about Christ and everything He does, if we accept the sacrifice of Christ, says He'll give you a robe of righteousness. Whoever has been baptized with Christ has died with Christ, and now God no longer looks at someone as though they're sinful. They're looked upon as perfect. So here and now, God will look upon me as perfect because I've accepted Jesus, and He doesn't see me anymore. He sees Jesus standing in front of me as my mediator. But that doesn't mean that I am perfect yet. So in God's eyes, He sees Jesus and He sees perfection, but I'm still being sanctified here on earth. So I think that's the only thought I had, and it builds upon what you were saying. So
so essentially, like once you become Christian, you could become saved, and then after that, you're basically okay, and then there's another level of okay, which is when you actually are saved.
Yes.
Later on.
So really, the process of sanctification is trying to get you to bear more the image of Christ. So Christ is already your mediator, and God sees Christ. But sanctification, while that's happening, God is slowly trying to make you more perfect and act more like Christ, to act like Him, to have desires like Him. And then, only at the second coming, when that sinful nature is gotten rid of, will that process be complete. Well, we're going to go into another bonus round. This is called The History of Edom. As I said, I did a lot of research on Edom, none of which is really relevant to the sermon, apart from the actions have consequences. But there are a few things that we didn't get to talk about in depth. So, let's explore a little bit about Edom. The ancient capital city of Edom was Bozrah, and the later capital was Sela, meaning rock, or the Latin name that we may be familiar with is Petra. Ever heard of Petra?
Yes.
The big fortress. Now, it's a common misconception that the Edomites built the fortress of Petra. What actually happened was they lived in that area, but the Nabatean Arabs, when they were invaded later on in their history, it was the Arabs who built the big fortress, not the Edomites.
Yeah, right.
And according to Genesis, Esau's descendants, they settled in a land and actually displaced another nation called the Horites. And they lived in the land of Seir. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to Genesis chapter 36 for a detailed chronology of the kings of Edom. Now the King Saul and King David, as we mentioned in the sermon, they fought with the Edomites. And King David actually got to the point where Edom became the vassal of Israel. They were like they pretty much conquered the city of Edom. And the Bible doesn't say this, but tradition says that King David placed governors or prefects over the Edomites, which is an interesting thing. Now, there are a lot of other places, not in the Bible, but in traditional history, which is why I didn't put them in the sermon necessarily. A lot of this comes from Jewish sources like the Tanakh and stuff like that, which at times can be pretty faulty, I suppose, not very accurate. So how about we just put a disclaimer for the rest of what we're going to say? This is just interesting stuff I found. Doesn't mean it's necessarily true. So that's the caveat there. And then pretty much the only other thing was that King Amaziah, he attacked the Edomites and he took the area of Selah, but he was unable to subdue Edom in the same way that King Saul and David was, to essentially conquer them. So that's some Edom stuff, but I want to know a little bit about Esau. What's this Esau guy all about? All of the stuff we're going to look at here about Esau comes from Jewish tradition, mostly in the Talmud. I thought this was just interesting, not necessarily because it's true. I don't think these stories are true, and we'll get to the reason why later. But it was just interesting hearing, it's almost kind of like fan fiction of what they thought, a little bit more extra information about Esau. Who knows? Maybe it is historically accurate, maybe it's not. It's a Talmud, I don't know. So, Jewish tradition tells that Esau traded his inheritance the same day that his grandfather Abraham died.
Oh, what a coincidence.
What a coinkydink. They believe that on that same day he committed 5 sins, and it's going to get ugly. Apparently, they say he raped a betrothed young woman, he committed murder.
Wait, who's this?
This is Esau.
On the same day?
On the same day. He denied God, he denied the resurrection.
This guy went insane.
Yep, and then he comes home, and that's when he asks for the stew, they say. And that's when he committed the 5th sin, he gave away his birthright.
Okay, so why? Why am I insane on the day, on just that specific day? Was that perhaps after he found out his father died, or...
I think what the story they're trying to portray is that, when his grandfather Abraham died, he went a bit nutters. But look at all the stuff he does in one day. He rapes someone and then goes, well, what else? What other deadly sin haven't I done yet? Murder. And then, he denies the resurrection of the dead and gives away his birthright on top of all that.
Totally goes off his rocker.
He goes off his rocker. So, want to hear about the murder story? I couldn't find too much info on the woman that he bumps into, but there's a detailed story about who he murders. Apparently, so Abraham's just died. He's just finished doing his stuff with a woman. He's just walking around in the fields now. He's lost his way. And then he sees King Nimrod with 2 servants. Now, here's where they lose me, and I think this starts getting fishy and whack. Esau knew that Nimrod, he wore the very clothes of Adam himself.
Oh, yes.
Which later became the property of Noah. Now, Noah's son Ham, who was Nimrod's grandfather, finally gave them to his descendant Nimrod. Now, these divine clothes of Adam's, they made Nimrod a powerful and skilled hunter and a mighty ruler over all the other kings.
Rightio. Magic, make yourself awesome at hunting clothes, and
Yeah.
achieve instant social ranks.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, well, it didn't help him, did it?
Yeah.
Okay, he gets... So what he does is, he really wants the clothes, he wants to be a good hunter and all this. So while the servants go off and do their thing, he kills Nimrod, and then he kills the two servants, and he takes Nimrod's clothes with him. Yeah, and who knows? Maybe that's why Esau gave up his birthright so easily. I mean, he had a magic cloak now that was supposed to give him social status and to be a king. Maybe he didn't need his birthright. Once again, the story sounds fishy. It's a Jewish traditional tale, but it's an interesting tale. It's cool to see, what they think, even though it's not necessarily biblical.
Yeah, definitely interesting.
A little bit of extra info. In the Book of Jubilees, Esau's father Isaac, he compels Esau to swear not to attack or to kill Jacob after he dies. Because he knows that Esau hates Jacob and he wants to kill him. So Esau, he agrees to it, but his sons don't feel the same way, and they actually start nudging their dad and going, "Hey, let's get some mercenaries. Let's hire some mercenaries and kill your brother, our
People
uncle."
were really savage back then.
They're real savage.
Want to sort out a problem? Hire some
mercenaries. Well, have we really become less savage? They're just on the dark web now. That's about it. Just on the dark web.
No, it's just there's a justice system now, I suppose. There's laws. And
it's true. I mean, their justice. It would have been a lot harder to get justice, and even justice was a lot more savage back then. You find that I was talking about this with a friend in Leviticus. A lot of the time, there's capital punishment given to a crime, and a lot of people kind of reactionary thing like, "Oh, what? Why would capital punishment?" Whether you think capital punishment is relevant for today or not, that's a different discussion. But they were living in tents, and they were nomadic. They were traveling around. It's not like they can build a prison. Like, they literally cannot build a prison in one spot. So I suppose that was one solution to getting rid of. You got a murderer. What are you going to do with him?
Yeah.
Put him over in Jehokabil's tent. That'll keep him out of everyone.
It's one
Sneaks
thing.
out of the tent.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's actually one thing that I actually quite like about society is, as much as I hate judgmental people, it's kind of the judgmental people who kind of form these expectations and almost make society a better place. For example, if someone stole something from someone, most people would look at that and say, "Hey, that's bad." And worse than the prosecution of justice, they'd get a lot of social justice.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something that's evolved a lot in the modern era. And I believe that's basically why we're less savage now is people you got the leftists.
Yeah. I think one of the good things about the Bible is, unlike other texts like the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita, other holy texts, it allows for the people to adapt and to evolve. God has an ideal moral standard, but the thing is, he also doesn't impress it on people immediately straight away. For example, if the Australian government tomorrow was to say, "We're hereby banning all alcohol and all cigarettes," we got a problem.
Yeah.
The population, maybe not smoking so much, but alcohol is such, it's a part of Australian culture, really. It's ingrained, have a beer and the barbie.
There's nothing more powerful than culture in society.
There's nothing more culture in society, and the only people who can really change culture are the people in it. Government can't legislate it, and so the good thing about what God does is he meets people where they're at and says, "I'm going to give you some guidelines as what to do. I'll give you a few improvements, but I'm also not going to turn society upside down and also, collapse an economy and an entire culture that binds people together in one day, overnight." Change can't happen overnight, and God realizes that. So I suppose that's also why we've become less savage, and as people develop and we grow better ideas and we go, you know what? that's probably not a good idea. Let's not do it anymore.
Yeah.
Let's not hire mercenaries anymore. So, yeah, it's cool how God allows for that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that was a tangent, but...
Oh, yeah. Anyway, the last thing we're going to look at is the death of Esau, which is another Jewish tradition. It tells that when Jacob, his brother, was brought to be buried in a cave, Esau, he came in and he stopped the burial from happening. He claimed that he had the right to be buried in the cave, complaining about the birthright once again. So after some negotiation with Naphtali, who was must have been a relative of theirs, Naphtali was sent to Egypt to get essentially like a document or a will stating that Esau gave that over to Jacob in the past. As this was going on, another relative of theirs, Husham, who was hard of hearing, he didn't know what was going on. And he didn't know why, his grandfather Jacob wasn't being buried. So he asked for an explanation. And then when he was told that they'd sent someone to go all the way to Egypt to get this document, he had a rage quit and he killed Esau.
Wow.
And apparently he knocked his head off or something like that, because apparently Esau's head rolled into the cave. And
no kidding.
Supposedly Esau's head is still in that cave to this very day.
Fascinating stuff.
Fascinating stuff. Take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
I don't think I would base any biblical stuff on that or anything. But again, interesting extra information about what the Jews think Esau was like. So that about wraps up the cutting room floor for today.
So, Christopher, do you have any recommended readings?
Yep. Today I'm going to recommend Ellen White's Patriarchs and Prophets. Specifically, you can just read the chapter Jacob and Esau, as well as the Book of Life, Volume 2, A Chosen People. I don't have an author for that. I'm really sorry. I looked everywhere. I probably should have gotten a publisher now that I think of it, but
Yeah.
oh well. If you look it up, I'm sure you'll find it. It's a good book, and it talks a lot about the culture and stuff of Edom as well.
So, Christopher, where can these people find you?
Well, you can find me here at the After 7 Podcasts YouTube channel, as you would think, and you can also find me at my other YouTube channel, Christopher Peterson. That's where all my sermons are, and if you clicked on the link below to the sermon Buy High, Sell Low, talk about in this podcast, that's where it can take you straight to my channel. Awesome. Well, that concludes today's podcast. Thank you for joining us and hearing a little bit about some Jewish tradition, a little bit about Esau and some magic clothes. We didn't get to talk a whole lot. We didn't read a whole lot from the Bible, but I think we had a really interesting discussion and talk a little bit about business.
Yeah.
Thanks, James, for having us. Thank you for being with us, James, I should say.
No worries.
Thanks for being with us, Business Proficionado. And we'll see you next week on the After Sermon Podcast. And with that said, have a good one and good night.